For many families during war, the loss of a father, son, or relative is heartbreaking. But for one family in America during the Second World War, it was particularly devastating, as they lost not one, not two, but 5 sons in one devastating attack aboard a US ship that shocked America and heavily influenced future US policy regarding the assignment of family members during war. And so, for today's video, I shall be talking about the Sullivan brothers. The Sullivan brothers lived in Waterloo, Iowa, and their parents, Thomas and Aletta, worked hard to give them and their sister Genevieve a good life. George Sullivan was the eldest. He was born in 1914. Next came Francis, Joseph, Madison, and finally Albert. The brothers were incredibly close. They played together as kids, worked together as adults, and spent most of their free time in each other's company. They had a motto, "We stick together," and it stuck for the majority of their lives. Prior to the United States' involvement in the Second World War, George and Francis had served in the United States Navy before they were discharged before the start of the war. When the shocking news of the Japanese strike at Pearl Harbor hit the airwaves, the 5 brothers rushed to serve their country and enlisted in the Navy. At the time, there was a policy in place that prevented family members serving together, but it was loosely enforced, and the 5 brothers were sworn in and left for basic training on the mandate that they stuck together. After completing their training, the Sullivan boys were assigned to the USS Juneau, which was an Atlanta-class light cruiser that had previously served in the Atlantic. The ship was reassigned to the Pacific and subsequently used during the Guadalcanal campaign. The ship's first major action was during the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, where it was part of a naval task force that saw engagement with the Imperial Japanese Navy, that saw the Japanese win a tactical victory with more tonnage sunk. But it did see the Japanese retreat, as its carriers had been badly damaged and they were thus unable to exploit their victory. After the battle, the Juneau was tasked with aiding the resupply of the Sullivan Islands, which, tragically for the Juneau, saw it come into engagement with a Japanese force that was also attempting to resupply its forces from the other side of the island. On the 12th of November 1942, the two sides clashed in the Pacific in a battle that raged well into the morning of the 13th of November. It was in this morning that the Juneau was hit by a torpedo from a Japanese destroyer that caused significant damage to the ship, causing her captain to give orders to withdraw, and the ship headed for safety and refit. As the Juneau headed for port to be repaired, it was spotted by a Japanese submarine, the I-26, which launched an attack on the stricken vessel. It fired its torpedoes, which made contact, and the Juneau exploded. The air was filled with debris and smoke, and in less than a minute, the ship sank, taking most of the crew down with her. 100 men were believed to have survived the initial attack, but due to a mix-up, a lack of rescue, the elements, and shark attacks, just 10 men survived the sinking and were rescued. But what happened to the 5 Sullivan brothers? Well, when the Japanese submarine's torpedoes hit, it's believed that Frank, Joe, and Madison were killed instantly by the subsequent explosion. Albert and George survived. Albert sadly drowned later in the sea. George, the eldest brother, survived for several days. It's believed that he died from hyponatremia, which is caused by high concentration of salt in the bloodstream caused by the seawater. This, and the grief of losing his brothers, saw him enter a state of delirium. He left the raft that he was on, entering the water, never to be seen again. Thomas and Aletta Sullivan, back home in Iowa, had become worried, as the boys' constant supply of letters had stopped arriving. Mrs. Sullivan wrote to the Bureau of Naval Personnel in January 1943, looking for answers. Their worst fears were confirmed on January the 12th. As Thomas Sullivan was preparing to leave for work, he saw 3 men in uniform arrive at their front door, stating that they had news about the boys. Thomas answered the door and asked the men which one. The reply they received was one that they were all dreading. The naval officer simply replied, "I'm sorry, all 5. The news of the brothers' death shocked the nation and garnered worldwide attention, with Pope Pius sending a letter and a silver medal to the family. The President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, wrote to the family and declared a ship would be named in their honour, as well as offering his sincerest condolences. Their sister Genevieve enlisted in the US Naval Reserve, and along with her parents took part in war bonds drives, visiting plants and shipyards throughout the United States. In 1948, the US passed a policy called the Sole Survivors Policy. It allowed the exemption of a sole surviving son from the draft if they'd lost a family member in military service. The brothers were memorialised in the 1944 film The Fighting Sullivans, which tells the story of the Sullivan brothers, with some deviations from the actual truth, but in all, it is an entertaining film. The USS Juneau's wreck was rediscovered in 2018 by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen's company, Vulcan Incorporated. That concludes today's video. If you enjoyed, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, as it does really help the channel. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you on the next one.